Ladies and gentlemen, it's 5:56 on a Friday night. Welcome to the 556.com. My name is Matt Kilgo. I'm going to be your host tonight. This is my website. It's my webinar. I can say what I please and do what I want, but I probably won't for the next 45 minutes. It's time to get started. Feel free to chime in with some chat questions. We have some fantastic guests tonight. As always, joining me, my co-host, our producer, Mariana Wegener. Say hello, Mary. There she is. Hello.
Hello.
But tonight, our two men of the hour, we have Todd Droege and Dr. Rick Hammesfhar. Todd is a Master Chief in Taekwondo. He is part of GoToFirearmSafety.com. He owns Tactical Martial Arts out in West Cobb. He's a firearms trainer, self-defense instructor. He's a firearms expert. He's been doing this stuff for over 40 years. He's going to talk to us tonight about range safety, situational awareness, and what to do in those first moments after you've had an accident. There's some sort of trauma. Where should we go from here? And then we also have Dr. Rick Hammesfhar. He's got so many things attached to his name. I'm just going to let him explain them all. He's a orthopedic surgeon, trauma specialist, has worked with SOCOM. He's got the coolest picture of all of us tonight with that, American flag in the background and the body armor. He's got that 1,000-yard stare going on. Dr. Hammesfhar is going to be able to tell us some of the most important things to remember about first aid and significant trauma, what we should have with us, just a whole host of things that begin with situational awareness. These two gentlemen have known one another a long time. They've trained together. They've trained law enforcement and military together. They're here tonight. I want us to all give them a special hand, golf clap at home. Let's go ahead and get started. Todd, tell us a little bit about yourself. Dr. Hammesfhar, you do the same, and then we're off and running.
Okay, you want me to start, Matt?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Todd Droege, Go-To Firearms Safety is, I'm the International Director for Training. I did pre-deployment training for the military for about 15 years, so that's where I got the honor to work with a lot of special ops guys. Started to learn the TCCC course back from some SEALs and active duty people we were hiring to help with our program. And the funny thing is how I went back. Dr. Hammesfhar has been my orthopedic surgeon for 25 years. And I was sitting on his table one day and I said, yeah, I'm doing this class this weekend and with this TCC thing, TEC, and he's like, what are you doing? And I said, this medical thing I've been doing with the SEALs is really cool. And he hands me this book. It says a Ranger Handbook by TCCC, developed by Dr. Rick Hammesfhar. I was like, oh, okay, good. Perfect. I know I've got it from the best guy on the planet. So that's how we kind of met, and he's taking care of my knees and everything else for my whole life. But it's just an honor to have him as part of our company and training our people too. But our main goal in firearms training, and our program is about a whole personal protection training. It's not just firearms. It's just not the Krav Maga, the hand-to-hand stuff, the emergency plans, the active shooter training that we've developed at the highest level because of the people, the honor I get to work with all the time, the SWAT guys in town, some of the team guys. So how we developed this is we started from what's the most important thing, which is the safety. Our goal, and when we did pre-deployment training, is we trained civilians like engineers, people worked on IED jammers and things like that to go overseas. These were people just like me. They never had any military or handgun experience or any kind of experience. So the problem was they were thinking they might be more of a hindrance or more of a problem than the bad guys, because they might end up shooting each other or shoot the other guy or something else. So our job was to make them safer than they were the day before. So that's our goal in our company, is to be safe every time we pick up a firearm, every time we do any kind of our training. So we have things in place that you really don't see or hear about that have been put in place to make sure that you're going to be safe, whether you know it or not. And those are part of the things we talk about. So the safety rules are the number one thing we talk about. All guns are loaded to be treated such at all times. We've kind of added some stuff. One gentleman out in California, he owns ITTS. He's one of the best instructors I've taken anything from, and he had a good detailed safety rules, and they sound familiar, but we've kind of added a few things here and there. But all guns are loaded to be treated such at all times. You can't have two sets of rules for firearms, one for loaded and unloaded. So you have to have that one complete set. Number two, we always talk about never cover anything you're not willing to destroy. That means yourself. And this is where everybody gets really twisted up, is with the holster. The holster is probably, if you look at all the statistics, that's where most people shoot themselves, because they had the wrong gun, the wrong holster. They didn't get proper training. They weren't taught how to do the different positions. So we spend a lot of time on that, and just movement, as everybody talks with their hands so much. Which way is that gun pointed? If somebody asks you a question, you actually turn the gun on you. That's been done a million times, I'm sure, where everybody's been training and been at. So we really focus on keeping the gun pointed down range, of course, but also yourself and other people. Then number three, keep your finger off the trigger unless you're fixed on the sights and you're ready to shoot, which we always add now, and there's a threat, because your finger should not be on that trigger if you're not on your sights. Your finger should not be on that trigger if there's not a threat there. So those are why people actually, we don't call it accidental. I think accidental is if lightning strikes your holster and your gun goes off. Everything else would be more negligent, because if the human's putting their finger on it doing something stupid, we want to avoid that. And I guarantee you, the people that train with us all the time have those rules down really well. And then the last two really is, be aware of your target and background. The ones we used this past weekend, that some of you were in class with me, was it's yes, the bullet can go through, and we're going to talk a lot about that with Dr. Hammesfhar with the medical part, but also, what if you're in a situation, active shooter or a family situation, home invasion, carjacking, and you pull your gun out to defend your family and stop the threat? And beyond that is, I always say, and I know the girls instructors are watching this, the group full of nuns. The bus full of nuns is always behind the people, right? So I go to defend my family, and what's beyond that? So you might actually have to take a side step to defend yourself to make sure that lane is clear. And then the last one, make sure your guns are clean and lubricated and in great working condition, because you need to make sure that if you ever need to use it, it's ready to go.
Okay, that's probably an overlooked rule that many of us unfortunately don't think about, and it's something that we covered last week when we talked to gunsmiths. Just clean it. It doesn't take long. Yeah. You don't have to over oil it. Just run a bore snake through it and make sure it's ready for the next day when you're going to shoot.
Yeah, if you see the SWAT, when I talk with the SWAT guys and the team members, I did a training with some SEAL guys a while back. What are they doing the day before? Because they know when they're going to do the mission. They know when they're going to serve the warrant, the SWAT guys. What are they doing the day before, that prior to the event? They're cleaning their guns. They're oiling them. They're checking their batteries. They're checking their night vision. They're doing all the things that if I was a civilian, I need to make sure happens, because if somebody breaks in my house in the middle of the night, I've got to stop the threat. And there's a million stories over and over and over. The gun didn't work. The gun malfunctioned. The light didn't work. So we want to make sure those things are all done prior. And that's part of the personal protection plan that we have, is you got to have these things in place way before.
And the other thing you really have to think about, Todd brought up a really good point. Like, what do you do if somebody breaks into your house late at night? And what the thing that nobody ever thinks about is hearing protection late at night or in the house. Because if you've ever fired a gun in your house, it's incredibly deafening, very loud. And then all of a sudden you've lost that sense of hearing that's so important. You can't tell if somebody else is going to be yelling for you. You can't tell where the invader is or the intruder is. And so it's not only a question of having your batteries, you've got to have the gun, you've got to have that hearing protection also, because otherwise it's not going to work out well.
And that's funny. You watch all these shows all the time, and the guy's in a gun battle with 3 rifles right next to their head, and nobody ever has any hearing problem. It's like, you would be so deaf you could not function after the first time that rifle went off next to your head. So
wait a minute. Are you saying that we can't believe everything that we see in television or in the movies?
Well, we'll talk about more of those when we get to your part, because after all the things we see on TV about the medical stuff, no wonder not everybody's dead.
Oh, come on. I thought sure that a sofa would protect me from an AK-47 in a gunfight.
Yeah, or that little wooden kitchen table.
Yeah,
just flip it over, it'll be fine. Let him shoot that AK into the table.
Works out really well. Yeah, no problem.
Wait, so that doesn't work?
Yeah, that doesn't work. No, doesn't work very well. And the cool thing is we were talking about it a while back, and we talked about what's beyond the target. We talked about any house that's built down south, there's nothing. There's nothing in that house that's going to stop that bullet. It's going to go through multiple walls. Maybe if we're up north, we got some serious houses up there, serious construction. But down here, I mean, your pistol round's going to go through multiple walls, your rifle round. And that's why when we discuss our training, we also teach you in home invasion, carjacking, everything, you have to use the proper ammo. Because if you're sending, that green tip, solid steel core AR-15 round through the wall. It's going through 7 walls and into your neighbor's house. So you might have to use frangible ammo for certain positions. You have to stage different magazines for different reasons. And you see a lot of people that understand that really have a good grip, or you're going to be calling Mr. Kilgo there because you shot your neighbor and then, 3 houses down because you didn't get any training and understand what the round will really do.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is you need to know the difference between cover and concealment. You also need to know the penetration power of these different bullets and what it'll go through. And there are some phenomenal videos on the internet showing the different types of ammunition that will penetrate just the standard concrete block or even bricks. And it's amazing. You put 2 or 3 9mm rounds into a concrete block, it penetrates it, as long as they're going in about the same area, because each one structurally weakens that block. So it's that knowing what is behind your target becomes incredibly important. And you're right that the load that you're using can make a big difference between what you're trying to achieve and creating more problems.
Sir,
I think what I hear you guys saying, and this is something that we talk about all the time, is one of the most important things that we can do is have a plan. Have a plan for your home, have a plan for your car, have a plan for public. The things that you do and how you respond to an event are going to be completely different at 3 o'clock in the morning than they would be if you're in a Marietta Square Market at 7 o'clock at night and something happens, or you're at a concert in Kennesaw, or at a concert in downtown Atlanta and something happens. You need to have a plan in place that takes care of as much as possible. As they say, John Chalishkashvili said, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. But then again, you got to have that battle plan, right? You've got to know at night, this is the type of ammo that I'm using in the home, because if I shoot the bad guy, that's where I want the round to stay. I don't want it going through him, through the wall, and into the 10-year-old's bedroom.
Exactly.
So let's
completely true. But it's interesting. We talk about having to have a plan. Yeah, you can sit there and create a plan and create what you think is the great plan. But to get to the successful plan, I'm not talking about the execution of it, but just to get to the development of a plan, you have to really understand the variables that go into that plan, analyze those variables, and figure out what the goal for each one of those variables is. Then when you have those questions answered, then you can really put together the plan. But at the same time, recognize that plan will probably change once it's enacted.
Being able to switch on the go like that's where the part takes so much training. So the part that we talk about all the time, like when we did the course last weekend, and we're doing them just about every month now, 1 or 2. We start off with the safety rules. We go through the range rules. The range rules about don't touch anything, don't touch the firearm, don't get it out until we tell you. So we can keep these safety things in place. But some of the ones that we specifically talk about is don't pick nothing up if you drop it. And so if it's the old thing, I was trying to chamber check, I went too far and the round comes out. Well, what does everybody do? They want to normally reach down immediately and pick it up. Well, that causes a big safety issue. I had I was actually doing an instructor course with another company and with 3 other guys, and it was a qualification time. I get ready to shoot. They said, shoot, fire, shoot your rounds. And all of a sudden the guy goes bang, click, and his gun doesn't fire. His magazine drops out right in front of me, and I'm holding a full-size 1911. Luckily, I've been through, and all the trainers that trained me, between the team guys and the SWAT guys and everything, we've been through so many situations like that. You don't move. Well, what does this guy do? He reaches down in front of me to grab that magazine. Well, what's happened? I've got that. Now the gun is at the back of his head. So I grab him by the arm and I pick him up, and he's like, what happened? And that's the problem with 90% of the stuff that I do, whether it's the firearms training or martial arts or the Krav Maga, the medical side, the little bit of medical side that we do is it's what they don't know. So they really have a tough time understanding why shouldn't I pick that up? So we make that a big thing. And then I had a customer a couple weeks ago in one of the classes, which, you come out of the holster and you drop your gun. Well, the last thing we want you to do is grab for it. And they actually said they grabbed for it, pulled the trigger, and shot somebody. So again, so if you drop your gun, let it hit the ground. These guns are made to be able to fall. They drop Glocks from a helicopter with one in the chamber. So you've got all these internal safeties that people really just don't understand about. And not all guns are great beginner guns. So we really try to educate you on getting the proper firearm for you at your level. And then sure, you can have other ones, but you need to have that one fighting pistol or rifle or rifle shotgun that serves that purpose. So again, don't be reaching for stuff. If you drop it, leave it there. And those guys are the worst. You drop that bullet out and you see that shiny thing on the ground. It's like, yeah, but it's a good one. Can I get it? I'm like, no, don't, just leave it there. So the rest of the training, they're looking down at that one shiny bullet. I'm like, just leave. I'm going to punch you in the mouth if you reach down to get that bullet, you know? So finally we take a break. I pick the bullet up, put it back in their pocket, and then they're all happy again. So again, I think, you know, just really harping on the safety. Everybody hears safety, but a lot of people don't have true safety, because when I'm not around them, then they could revert to bad. When they're training with me, when I'm not around the guys that have been training us for a while, they're as safer than me too. So that's the kind of thing that we want to instill in them. It's not like go watch, and we talked about this the other day, go watch the video. Guess what? The video is a good help, but it's not enough to make you as safe at firearm. You have to get out and do training.
So what you're saying is watching a video about how to handle a pistol, watching a video or a webinar about first aid is not enough. You need to get out there and you need to get training.
Right. If you don't get the hands-on, taste it, smell it, whatever, if you don't get that, when Dr. Hammesfhar squirts that thing and we're putting that tourniquet on that leg and that thing's squirting you in the face, you know, you don't have a clue what it feels like to do it. I just imagine most people can't pull it off.
And of course, what we're talking about, what Todd's talking about, is some of the training that Dr. Hammesfhar does. We'll talk to him in just a second about some of the classes that he teaches. But funneling down, big to small, macro to micro, what we're saying here is that first aid begins before you even get to the range. Know what your plan is for the day, know your limit, and abide by your limitations. You know, and I think that's what's great. If you're going for training, you know that you need some help, or you're looking for some help. Be open to taking assistance. Take some training so that you better understand not just your firearm, but how to use it and what happens after you use it.
Right.
We get to the range, we know the 4, and Todd has an extra basic safety rules. Treat every firearm as if it's loaded. Don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire. Don't point a firearm at anything you're not willing to destroy. Know what is beyond your target and keep your firearm lubed and clean. Well, so we start with the basic rules that apply everywhere. Then we talk about range rules. Todd, you're doing a great job of covering those things. Everyone's a range safety officer. That's what we say, you know, when we work with the Cub Scouts with BB guns, when we work with the big boys and police and law enforcement and civilians, everyone can be a range safety officer. If you see an unsafe condition, call cold range, and everyone should stop and wait until that situation's been rectified, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then the next step we do too is also developing that whole emergency plan. So we did the safety rules, we did the range rules. Nobody has any guns or nothing on yet. We talk about this, then we go into the emergency part of it. If someone does, or someone on the range or someone near has some type of accident or something happens, what are we going to do? So my truck is always parked out. There's no one in front of me. Like we talked about last week, Matt is driving. The hospital's 13.3 miles. It's in everybody's GPS. I'm going to be taking care of you. I'm the most experienced one. If I'm the one that's wounded or something happened, then these 2 girls that have been through Dr. Hammesfar's situation, one's going to be in charge of taking care of the medical side of it. The other people then have a job of, you're going to collect all the weapons and make sure they're clear and put them away and get everybody back to their car, or get everybody grouped till we call and let you know what's going on. Because the worst thing can happen is when this all goes haywire, please God, it never ever happened. But if someone gets injured somehow, it might be somebody has a heart attack on the range. It doesn't mean somebody shoots somebody, or they're allergic to a bee and get stung by a bee and there's some allergic reaction. I have to have the vehicle. A lot of times I can get to the hospital much faster than calling the ambulance and getting there, especially right now with this. We're talking about delayed times for emergency medical, delayed times for police and fire and everything else, because we don't know what's going to happen. So if I can get them there, we have this plan based in place. And then that's what I learned from the team guys when we did the training overseas, talking about an emergency plan. They had an emergency plan and then 10 more to back up every emergency that could happen during that, you know, backup routes, different drivers, different vehicles. So again, we don't have to be that specific, but you better have a plan or you're just going to fail and bad things happen. It could be, we were out hunting. We talk about, Law Shield has a lot of things about hunting, and somebody can get hurt there. What are you going to do? You're an hour and a half away from a hospital. So, I think a lot of this stuff that we're talking today is really going to make a big impact on everybody's life, and learn about this stuff and go do it and make yourself part of it. You don't have to be afraid to take a class. I had my veterinarian guy. He's a great shooter, been to Africa, does all kinds of courses. His wife's a great shooter. She went to one class and the guy embarrassed her because she didn't know how to speed reload. She never wants to go to another one again. And I'm convincing her to come back to our class because she said, I really love to shoot, but I'm afraid somebody's going to say, 90% of my clients are women and they're much better at this than we are. So, I think, you got to get the whole package though. You can't just take a gun class or a medical thing or a self-defense thing. It has to be a whole package to be successful.
Yeah, because really
go ahead, Dr. Hammesfhar.
I'm sorry, there are really a couple of things that you're really harping on. The first is you want to have be exposed to experience through a lot of different classes covering everything that you could possibly encounter when you're shooting. And the nice thing about this is that it's not that what you're learning is not just limited to shooting, because it does, if all the things you talk about, having a plan for some sort of life-threatening emergency. Well, it really doesn't matter whether it's a life-threatening emergency at the range or whether you're at home and your daughter falls through a plate glass window. You still have to have the same plan in effect and know exactly what to do. Or if you witness something on the interstate. We had one class, last fall, and one of the students in the class had been one of the first on scene at an auto accident downtown Atlanta. He ended up applying tourniquets to the patient's both of her legs. I think the one was completely amputated, the other one was a partial amputation. So, and he really just took the class just because he wanted to know what to do in case of a gunshot wound. But all these skills apply throughout life. And the other thing that Todd brought up that was really important is that you have to plan for the eventualities that you can't really that you may not readily foresee. For example, when we're doing medical planning for SWAT missions, okay, everyone does a tactical plan and figure out who's going to take the door and who's going to be in the front of the stack and back of the stack and so forth. But then we also do a medical plan and do a medical brief. And the medical brief is, okay, what happens if somebody falls off the back of the truck while we're even approaching the target? What happens if we're going up to the target and somebody, as they step out of the truck, they fall and twist their ankle? And so we start talking about all these other potential problems that can throw off the flow of a procedure or of some type of tactical operation. But nonetheless, we have to be able to plan for those and account for those, and the tactical team has to know how they're going to react to that. So when you're starting to think about these things, you really want to think about, okay, what do I do if this happens? And if that happens and I can't respond in such and such fashion, what's my backup plan? So you really want to have a primary plan, an alternative plan, a backup plan, and then an emergency plan. And so basically, when one fails, you know exactly what to do and how to pivot to the next thing so that you're wasting as little time as possible. The reason the time is so important is that when you talk about these major vessel injuries, especially up around the leg and the armpit and so forth, you basically can die and bleed to death in 3 or 4 minutes. So the time to do the analysis on this is just not there. So if something had happened out of the range, as Todd was talking about, everyone's running around frantic trying to figure out what's going on, who's going to do what, who's going to put on a tourniquet, or who's going to get the car and back the car up to get the patient. By the time you figure all that out, it's too late. So that's why this stuff needs to be worked out ahead of time. And Todd's done a great job with laying this out for his classes. But the thing that's important is you've got to take this knowledge then, and even if you're not in the class, start to apply it to some of the other situations in your life. And that's the best way to make this work.
And it sounds like it's
invasion.
What, Todd?
The home invasion, because you just turn your family into a mini SWAT team. You can have the kids do things and train your family. You know, we talk about the self-defense aspect of it is when we do the gun defense. I know I always take the gun to one side, but if I have to train to do the other side, I've already done it 7 million times this way. Now I got to start over and do it with the other hand. No, it's easier to have my wife walk on the other side. So I know which way I'm taking the gun. So those kind of procedures and those kind of things really help plan the family. Now the kids, you do this. So if I say we're in a restaurant and some dude walks in, hey, I say the code word hippopotamus or something with the family, I'm throwing money on the table, we're going, you do this, you grab the back of my belt, you got the medical bag is in your backpack anyway, honey, or my backpack, and I have all this stuff readily, you can turn your family into that cool little mini SWAT team that you just talked to Dr. Hammesfhar talked about.
So what you're not advocating arming children with assault weapons or rifles or anything. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is make sure that everyone's ready for those emergencies and make sure that they're trained. And that makes a lot of sense. You know, we talk about packs. This is a pack that I bought from Todd that Dr. Hammesfhar put together himself. You guys train together and we talk about the stuff that that goes in it. You've got tourniquets and you've got chest seals and intubators and anti-clotting or clotting equipment. That we want to get into the meat of that here in a couple of minutes. You know, we've talked about preparing to be at the range rules, bare bones. What, Dr. Hammesfhar, what do you think in the event of an emergency? Let's say you've had a little bit of training. What's the most important thing that you can have with you in the event of a gunshot wound?
Without a doubt, a tourniquet. If you look at this, I had the honor of right after 9/11, I was approached by USSOCOM and asked to help them to work with them and solve some problems. And so had the tremendous opportunity of working with Captain Frank Butler, and it was Frank who actually developed TC3. And then Frank was the one that put together the the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care. And I had the honor of working under him. We kind of ran our own little group and we developed protocols for soldiers who were working in very remote and austere medical operating environments, I should say. So Frank ran the TC3 group, I ran this other group, and they just overlapped very nicely. And then from that, I went and have moved more into the law enforcement sector and also the civilian side. So if you look at what Frank showed, he basically showed that you bled to death in about 3 to 4 minutes if you had a major arterial bleed. The second thing that killed you was basically your airway obstruction. And then the third thing was a chest wound. And so you can live without air for about 5 or 6 minutes. Some of your chest wounds will take you about 20 minutes to before you die. So if you can say, what's the most important thing to carry? It's the thing that will treat the #1 killer, and that's the loss of blood. Because if you don't have the blood in you, then you're not going to carry the oxygen around. So I definitely carry a tourniquet. And there are tons of tourniquets out there. I basically like to go with the tourniquets that the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care recommends. There are now about 7. The 2 that I use a lot of, and the ones that I'm most familiar with are the CAT tourniquet. The soft T wide is a good one. There's a Sam XT, and you've got and the Ratching medical tourniquet. And those are all great tourniquets. There are a number of tourniquets out there that are just horrible. So to put this in perspective, if you do a Google search, you get hundreds of tourniquets that come back. The FDA has actually approved almost 1,700 medical devices to use the name tourniquet. The Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care has only approved 7 of them for use in battle or in combat. So anytime I talk to people, I stick to those tourniquets. And the one that I like, it's just my personal preference, and that's the way it is. It's the CAT tourniquet. But definitely want to use the CAT tourniquet. Todd's got it over there. It's basically, it has a windlass on it, and just strap it around and tighten it down. But like everything else, it's all about learning muscle memory, because it takes time to put one of these things on. So you have to learn how to evaluate the wound that the person has, how to put the tourniquet on in a very rapid fashion, how to be sure it's an effective tourniquet, because if you put it on incorrectly, you can actually cause some damage to it, to the person, I should say. But yeah, the tourniquet's the #1 thing, Matt.
I think
high and tight and make it hurt. Right?
Yeah.
High, if you put it on a high and tight, it cannot go over any bones. It cannot go over joints, because the tourniquets work by compressing a muscle. and the muscles then compress the blood vessels. So you put it on high and tight. By high and tight for the arm, we're talking about putting up right about here, so it's not coming over the shoulder up there. It's coming up more like that. Same thing in the thigh, go up towards the groin, but not over the pelvis. And then tighten down as much as possible. If the patient's complaining about pain, you probably have it on tightly enough. Or turn it one more time. Either one works really well. But they're not comfortable to put on, so people are not happy with this.
Biggest misconception with tourniquets, what about belts? Do belts work?
Yeah, and they do in Hollywood. It's amazing. In general, there are three classes of tourniquets. There's the commercial tourniquet that has the windlass, and those are the ones we're talking about. There's the improvised tourniquet that has a windlass, and the windlass is the thing that you twist. So if you think about the Boy Scout tourniquet, and the Boy Scout tourniquet is you take that triangular bandage and fold it up, and then tie it around the arm, put in a piece of wood and tie that, and then twist it. That basically, that type of windlass improvised tourniquet has about a 30 to 32% failure rate. Commercial tourniquets have about a less than 2 or 3% failure rate. Now the other tourniquet, which is you're talking about, like a necktie, because we've all seen people take neckties off, or t-shirts, or a belt. None of those have a windlass, and the failure rate on those in the lab studies is 100%. So belts, they're too tight, or they're too stiff. You can't really twist them. Neckties just don't work. There's a real science to tourniquets. They have to be a minimum width. They have to generate and you have to be able to generate a certain amount of force underneath the tourniquet. And so that's where the problem with improvised tourniquets comes in. You just can't meet all the scientific requirements of a tourniquet. So yeah, belts don't work, despite Hollywood.
So make sure that you've got an actual tourniquet. Be prepared. Have that tourniquet, take it with you. And I'll tell you, when I go and train with Todd, just like last weekend, when I went, I had a belt, I had a medical bag on it. It was a medical bag much like Todd's, because I think you two guys packed that medical bag for me.
Right.
I knew that Todd was going to have one. I had one anyway. I keep one in my truck. My wife keeps one in her car. I carry one in the bag that I carry when I go into a courtroom. It doesn't have sutures. It doesn't have cutting tools. It's got a tourniquet, and it's got chest seals in it. The two, I think, most important things. We talked about tourniquets. Maybe this is a good segue. Tell us what the importance of a chest seal is to a first aid kit.
Okay, so if you go through the acronym that you want to follow in treating these things, the word is MARCH. M is for massive bleeding. That kills us the fastest, so that's the thing we take care of first. A is for airway. So you can go about 6 minutes with an airway obstruction. So if somebody gets shot, or injured in any fashion, you want to be sure that they have their airway cleared and they're getting air into their lungs. C is for a chest wound, and you want to be sure that the chest is working so that the air can get from the airway into the lungs and into the blood. So when you're shot through the chest, it interferes with the way the chest works. What chest seals do is they basically cover up the wound, and by covering up the wound, it helps the chest function to be reestablished. But here's the thing you have to remember. Whenever a bullet goes into a chest, it also comes out, because there's not a whole lot of structure in the chest. Basically, it's a huge empty cavity. So the chest seals come in packs of 2. One is for an entrance wound, and one is for the exit wound. The chest seals are the same, so you don't have to identify and don't get hung up on where did the bullet go in and where did it come out. All you want to do is you want to find every hole, and you want to put a chest seal over every hole. So the first place you look is the front and back of your chest, up underneath your armpits. Let's say there's only one hole there, up in the front of the chest. Well, you put a chest seal on that, and then you've checked his back, you can't find anything. You check his armpits, you can't find anything. Then look in his abdomen, you see another hole. Put a chest seal on that too. And here's the reason for that. If the bullet went into the abdomen, penetrated the diaphragm, penetrated the chest, and then came out, you can seal the one up here on the chest. But every time he breathes in, air will go from the outside into the abdomen, through the diaphragm, and into the chest. And so the lungs still won't work correctly. So you just have to, anything in the box, and the box is from the pelvis up to right about here at the bottom of the neck. Anything in the box has to be sealed with the chest seal to get things to work.
So it's not just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. You've actually got to help create that closed system inside so that person can breathe again.
Yeah, what you're really doing is for the chest to work, you have to be able to generate negative pressure inside the chest. And so what you're doing is by taking the chest seal, which is essentially a piece of plastic, you're putting this piece of plastic on the chest wound, so that when the chest when the chest expands, nothing goes into the chest. So if there's a hole there, when you inhale and expand the chest and there's a hole there, instead of the air going in through your nose and mouth, it goes in through the hole in the chest wall. But it doesn't go into the lungs, it surrounds the lungs. Well, I need the air inside the lungs so it can get to my blood supply. That's why I have to close this chest hole, so that the air now goes into my mouth and then down into the lungs.
What about the old thing about the tampon? I'll just stick the tampon in there. That'll work. Is that another thing that you teach during your course?
Yeah, not really. We did some interesting studies on that. The average size tampon. Let's talk about blood loss from a major wound. Okay. You can bleed to death in about 3 minutes. So the way this works is for the first 30 seconds, you'll lose about 1,000 cc's of blood, which is, so you think of a liter bottle of Coke. That's how much blood you lose in the first 30 seconds. Now, let's look at a tampon. The average tampon will absorb about 15 cc's of blood, and that's it. So if you're dealing with a wound where you can put out 1,000, and you're taking a tampon that only has can only handle 15 cc's, what do you think happens to that thing? It's not going to do any good at all. So it's an old wives' tale, but tampons into bullet wounds just do not work for a variety of reasons. But that's probably the simplest one to explain.
Okay. All right. So I will make sure and take all those tampons that I'm carrying around with me out of the bag.
Take them out of the bag. They're just not going to work. Not going to work. But you brought up a great point earlier, Matt. And the point was you want to have it's the modularity of the kit that's important. So there are basic ingredients that you need in this kit, but then you have to have the modularity so that you're doing the kit for the specific circumstance. So, for example, this is just another variation of the kit that you had earlier. It's the same thing. It's about 6 inches by about 8 inches and holds 2 cat tourniquets, 2 chest seals, trauma shears, combat gauze, a bunch of other things. But that's not really realistic for me to wear around all the time. And now that's great to put on the headrest of a car. So it's a great car kit. If I'm going to the range, it's good. Hunting, camping, something like that. If I've got a backpack, that's great. I can go on a trip and throw something like that into a briefcase. But if I'm wearing shorts and walking around, down the square in Marietta, it's not like I'm going to have that strapped on. So you can have different size kits for different purposes. You might have a really stripped down kit if you're doing something like I was just talking about, walking around the square, or maybe all you do is take things out, and if you have cargo pants on, you're kind of distributing things between your cargo pants. So it's not like one kit fits everything. It's knowing what's in the kit and what you really have to have. And at the very minimum, it's a tourniquet, and then an NPA, which helps the airway if you know how to use it, and then a chest seal.
I think important thing too is to remember, when I wear my kit's for me. It's not for anybody else. That kit's for me to take care of myself, because I might not get help. Now, I
thought we were friends, Todd.
Yeah. Do I choose to use it for my friends and anybody get injured? Of course, because I'm the first responder on the scene. I'm going to do that because I probably have more training than anybody else in the class. But again, that's why we encourage every student to have their own kit. Their kit, that's a requirement in the class now, especially all the advanced classes. You have to be wearing your own kit. I have another kit at the truck. I got another kit on the tailgate. So in case there is a multiple thing, and we were speaking about that before when we made our emergency plan, and we're going to go to the hospital in the vehicle, and I got the kits. Well, I'm going to have another one in the back because I might need, what Dr. Hammesfhar always teaches, you might have to put 2 tourniquets on there. And then my next question is what if that tourniquet, chest seal, what if we start getting, because I've seen and I've heard a lot of wounds in the hip or in the armpit or in that area where I can't get a tourniquet. Dr. H, what do you really recommend for that type bleed? Because that tourniquet ain't going to work there. I can't get it on that spot, and I'm not going to use a chest seal. So what do you recommend for that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Todd. There are a couple areas, and you talk about what's called the junctional wound, and those are areas that have major blood vessels, and you cannot use the tourniquet. So it's right up here. You're sure not going to use the tourniquet around the neck. Right up here in the armpit, you've got some major vessels, and then that typical wound that was everyone knows from Black Hawk Down, very high in the groin, and that's where wound packing comes into play. And wound packing is a technique whereby you take a roll of gauze that's been manufactured with some type of ingredient that will actually jumpstart blood clot formation. And if you know how to do it correctly, by holding that material and packing the wound with that material, holding it for a minimum of 3 minutes, that typically will allow a blood clot to form. And so the areas where you cannot put a tourniquet, this is just another great option for how do you stop the bleeding, because otherwise they're going to bleed out. But there, there's something. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say I'm not advocating a particular brand, but I think Mariana just put it up. Quick Clot is kind of what you're talking about. That's one of various forms, right?
Yeah, there are a couple of different types. There's Quick Clot. You gotta love the FDA, I tell you. Quick Clot is basically it's a kind of a polyester rayon cotton type mixture. It's just a roll of gauze basically. And when they manufacture it with kaolin. Well, what's kaolin? It's clay, right? Have you ever heard of clay and this roll of gauze going bad? No, but the FDA has put a 5-year expiration date on it.
Exactly.
Now the reality on this is, so somebody up there thinks that clay goes bad with time after it's been dug out of the ground, but the reality on this is these things are vacuum packed. As long as the vacuum seal remains intact, the clay's not going to go bad. The roll of gauze is not going to go bad. But if the vacuum seal is broken, yeah, then you need to get something or replace that roll. But there are a couple of different types. I'm sorry.
No, what I was going to say is what we're talking about is a hole maybe in the armpit where you can't get a chest seal. You rip this stuff open and you just start packing it into the wound, right?
Right, exactly. Basically, if you look at this picture, it looks like it's an accordion fold or a Z fold. So what happens, you'd rip it open and you pack it in the wound. And as you pack it in, there are techniques for how you do this. So you basically have to keep pressure on the thing, on the packing the whole time. Then once it's packed, you have to keep further pressure on it for a minimum of 3 minutes, because it takes that long for the ingredients to really interact with blood clotting factors and make the blood clot. And there are a couple of different types. This is a Quick Clot. There are other ones out there that's called Celox, Scotagauze, things like that. There are pros and cons to all of them. My particular preference is for Quick Clot, because Quick Clot and combat gauze have done studies that show that this stuff is effective in animals that have been anticoagulated. So if an animal is on Plavix or Coumadin or heparin, the stuff works. And frankly, most of this country is on something. They're either taking aspirin, they're taking Motrin, they're taking something that interferes with the blood clotting. So I'd rather use a hemostatic gauze that's been shown to work in animals that have that are on drugs that interfere with blood clotting. So that's my particular preference. The other thing is you don't want to use the powder. Some of the stuff comes in powder form.
That's what I was going to say, the granular stuff.
Yeah, the grain. And if you can think about the logic of this, you've got blood that's spurting out and you're trying to pour a powder on top of something that's spurting out. That becomes very difficult to get the material to stay in the wound to form a blood clot. So just don't waste your time getting the powders at all. You really need the rolls of gauze that are impregnated with this hemostatic material.
We do have a question that's popped up from Stephen Shaw, one of our listeners. What is the time it takes to expire from an arterial wound, and what are the steps that can be taken to prevent it?
Depends on the size of the artery. If you look at the worst case scenario, it's about 3 or 4 minutes. Because what happens is that after about 3 minutes, you've lost so much blood that you enter a state called irreversible shock, and it doesn't matter what you do, you can't bring somebody back from that. So with a major artery, like a femoral artery, like Black Hawk Down injury, a high groin injury, it's about 3 minutes to die from one of those wounds. So the steps that you take from it are, first of all, you've got to stop the bleeding. So you want to identify the bleeding as quickly as possible. And then if it's on a limb where you can put a tourniquet, you want to put a tourniquet. If it's up in one of the areas where you cannot put a tourniquet, then you've got to get direct pressure on it, either reaching into the wound with putting direct pressure on it, or ideally having some type of gauze or something that you can pack into the wound so that by packing it, you can also create direct pressure on the wound. But Steve, the real question is, who's going to do this? Because here's the problem in this country. Everyone assumes that somebody else will jump in and take control. And the time for these things to react and save somebody's life is incredibly short. So if you've got a group of people around, one person has to step up as soon as possible and take charge and start telling people what to do. You call 911. You come over here and need some help. Tilt his head back, get the airway, and then at the same time while you're doing that, while they're doing that, get pressure on the wound and start putting a tourniquet on. But somebody has to step up and take charge. You can't always assume that somebody else there is going to know what's going on, or they will be better prepared or better taught to know what to do. Because unfortunately, in some of these situations, people may have more knowledge, but this is the first time they've actually been exposed to it, and they go into a mental vapor lock and they just cannot function. So somebody has to step up and do it very quickly.
So answering that question that we have there on the screen, what is the biggest mistake people make during an emergency? It sounds like not acting, not following, not being that gal, not being that guy, not being that person.
Yeah, it's basically taking out your iPhone to video to photograph everything else that's going on.
Right. Dr. H, one of the scenarios you have us do in our instructor training is you bring out that big old giant bloody roast and put a hole in it. And actually, Stephen, the guy just asked a question, he's actually one that got to do it, I believe, with a couple of the lady instructors. But when you bring out that big bloody roast and actually have to feed that in there, it really, so the scenario training that you do in your courses is by far the most advanced stuff I've seen. It really takes you, I mean, put a tourniquet on, that's pretty, we do that through every instructor course, we did it in the training last week. That was the last drill. You had to come up, shoot multiple targets. At the end, you had to run back, put the tourniquet on and raise your hand, kind of like you're a rodeo guy, but you'd have to actually physically get the tourniquet on. And if you don't do that multiple times and getting that experience of being in Dr. Hammesfahr's class and sticking that Z-pack gauze down in there and he can correct you and fix you, that's invaluable to do, having something like that. Because when you see that bloody roast, that's about as close as you're going to see as what a bloody thigh looks like. And you've already experienced it, like you said, instead of the first time you're seeing it is the time it's actually happening. And that's the worst kind of training you can possibly do.
Yeah, we've really had some great training aids that we've used, and we've got some that where basically they're bleeding wounds. You put on somebody's thigh, but it's all under their clothes. Well, if they put the tourniquet on correctly, I mean it'll pump out about 1 liter every 60 seconds, 1,000 cc's every 60 seconds. So if you put the tourniquet on correctly, yeah, you'll shut it off. If you get it on incorrectly, it just keeps bleeding. But just like with the human, the longer it takes to get the blood stopped, the lower the spurting and the less the amount of, eventually the blood stops completely, which is probably consistent with real life too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sorry, it's a training aids and just developing muscle memory. I'm sorry, Mariana.
It's okay. We have one more question from Jeff. He wants to know, he says he's never been taught how to pack a wound. And if he does this for a stranger and they still die, how much danger is he in of being sued? So this is more of a question for Matt, I believe.
Oh, Matt.
This is me. Yeah, Jeff, that's a great question. As a matter of fact, I just got a text from Mariana. Make sure you talk about Good Samaritan. That's a good point. Sometimes what keeps us from being that person, that gal, that guy who jumps into the fray and says, this is what we got to do to save a life, people are afraid. So many people are afraid of getting sued, and with good reason. There are a lot of lawyers out there who will take any opportunity to try and take somebody else's money. There are some sue-happy people out there. In Georgia, at least, we do have a Good Samaritan law, and people often get that confused with duty to retreat. There's no duty to retreat in Georgia. They say, well, a Good Samaritan law says I can stand my ground and return fire. I said, well, no, that's stand your ground. Let's don't get that confused. What the Good Samaritan law is that if you render emergency assistance to someone, then so long as you don't receive any compensation from it, And that may be the pie that grandma wants to cook for you to thank you for saving baby doll's life. I don't know. But as long as you don't receive any compensation for the work that you do to save that person's life, then you are granted a type of immunity. The Good Samaritan Law, the General Assembly, our legislators want people to help other people. So they've done they've done the good thing to give to us an immunity from suit. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be sued. Just like we say all the time, even if you've done something to protect your family, just because you can't be convicted doesn't mean you can't be arrested. Just because you can't be found liable doesn't mean you can't be sued. But in this scenario, the Good Samaritan Law would provide immunity to you. So jump in there, do what you can, try and save that life. If you make it worse, let's hope that that doesn't happen. Knock on wood, that would never happen. If whatever you do at that point, you can't be held liable for civilly. So don't be afraid to jump in there and try and save a life. Make sure you've got the training to do it. And I want to harp on that. And this is a good opportunity. Shameless plug time. Todd, you do a lot of training. Dr. Hammesfhar, you do a lot of training. And let me tell you, folks, I've known both of these guys. I've known Todd for almost 15 years. I've known Dr. Hammesfhar probably 6 or 7 years. I've known him quite a while. We all speak. We're all US Law Shield seminar speakers. So full disclosure, we're all connected to US Law Shield. There's an underlying theme you'll find in our webinar. I pull in a lot of folks who owe me favors, who said they'd help me out, that are US Law Shield speakers. Todd and I were going to speak locally at a gun store, and Todd had a blowout in his knee. He's like, look, Matt, I'm having surgery today. I just can't speak. I'm like, well, that's a problem. I called Dr. Hammesfhar. Dr. Hammesfhar, I'm in a bind. I'm in a pinch. Can you come in and pinch hit for Todd Droege? He was going to talk about first aid for us. He's like, oh, yeah, that's great. Dr. Hammesfhar shows up. I'm like, doctor, I really appreciate you doing this for us. It was a last minute thing. You know, Todd had a problem with his knee. He's like, oh yeah, I operated on Todd this morning. So Dr. Hammesfhar, yeah, he had operated on my speaker, fixed his knee, come out of surgery, washed up, and then come in place of my speaker to talk about first aid. So as far as I'm concerned, there's really no one better to have around you at any given time than either Todd Droege or Dr. Hammesfhar. I will say this too, after some of the things we've talked about tonight, when I go home tonight, I may not leave the house ever again. But at least I've got a plan.
Well, it's kind of you say that. I got a good question for you though. The Good Samaritan Law, you're talking about, okay, and I can see it up on the screen there, but what defines what a reasonable person will do who's not really a medical personnel? So,
you know, that's a good question. That's a very good question. When we talk about reasonable person, we're not talking about your subjective belief or my subjective belief. It's what a reasonable person, given all these facts, would believe is reasonable. And we're talking more along what doctors and civil attorneys like to talk about, the reasonable standard of care. Okay. You know, I think that this whole COVID-19 pandemic that we're underneath, maybe that's changed the standard of care. Maybe whereas before we wouldn't know how to do certain things, we now can say, all right, we'll cover his nose, keep 6 feet away, everybody, while I attempt to resuscitate this man. I don't know, but I think a lot of it would have to do with reasonable standard of care. But the legislature has protected us, and Mariana's actually pulled it up for us here, right here. 51-1-29 protects any person, including medical professionals, from liability when rendering emergency care in good faith at the scene of an accident. Now, is it going to protect an emergency trauma doctor at the hospital? Yeah, probably not. If he's driving home to have dinner with his family, his boyfriend, his girlfriend, and he sees an accident, jumps out of the car, grabs a medical bag, and goes to help, I think that's where he's going to protect you. The General Assembly's taken, I think, some of the guesswork out of reasonableness by making it clear by statute, if you're assisting with an emergency, you're protected from liability. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, but what I was kind of interested in was that there are a lot of courses around the country right now. They're teaching tourniquets, airway management, chest seals, and wound packing. And so is that now considered to be a reasonable standard for people to do?
I think so. I think so. You have to look to the community. I know that when it comes to this type of civil issue, it's going to be what the prevalent standard of care is in the community. So let's compare downtown Atlanta or the greater Atlanta area to Anchorage, Alaska. I would think that the standard of care in Anchorage, Alaska might be a little bit higher. Why? You've got to be a little more resilient to live in Anchorage, Alaska. You know, you might have a polar bear walk into your dining room one night. There aren't as many people around. It's much harder to find a doctor. So you have to be much more self-reliant. I would think in a situation like that, maybe the standard of care in some place where it's harder to get to a doctor and it's more reasonable to believe that you have been trained would be higher than in a place like Atlanta where, you know, you may not even know your neighbors, you know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've kind of wondered about that. I would think since the with the advent of the Stop the Bleed course that's put out by the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security on a national basis, that now pretty much has defined the standard of care for the bystander approach to trauma, which is really what we're talking about. We're not really talking about the physician's approach or the PA's approach to trauma. We're really talking about guys like Todd that take this course and they learn these things to do, and is that now pretty much a standard of care on the local issue. And I think since these courses have been rolled out nationally with some type of federal approval, that it's going to be you know, easier to defend somebody if something happened.
I think so. I think you may. Well, no, and you may be right, but again, I would say that whatever the standard that an individual's been trained to, I like the way that the General Assembly has responded by saying, look, all you got to have is emergency. All you got to do is your best.
Interesting.
And then you'd be then you would be immune to that degree. We've got one more question, and then I think it's going to be time to wrap it up for the night. We are doing an after party, right, Mariana?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Oh, look, it's right there.
Just look at that.
Amazing.
She's good.
She is good. Cindy Lefsey has a question for us. Is it also a good idea to carry items to treat non-arterial, less than major wounds? She says 4x4, ABD pads, compression tape, regular tape, trauma scissors, gloves, and of course Band-Aids. I know she's a nurse, so she's not throwing us a softball. She's throwing us a tough question here. What do you think, Dr. Hammesfhar?
It's a great question. That's where it gets back to the purpose and the modularity. Now, if you're going off on a weekend camping trip, yeah, you probably do want to carry all that stuff. If you're just driving around town, you might want some of those components in your car kit. But if you're walking around going to a concert, you're probably not going to carry all that stuff with you. And then you want to think about what can you carry that will have a dual purpose. So a lot of the trauma dressings will have dual purpose. Wound packing material, even though it's designed to pack in a wound, it also makes a great ABD pad, which is a type of really thick dressing that absorbs blood, for those of you that don't know what an ABD pad is. If you just need something smaller, it's a waste of hemostatic gauze, but you could conceivably open it up and just cut out a little short strip and make that into like a 4x4 dressing, and then wrap the trauma dressing on top of it. So if you know the equipment that you're carrying and can think outside of the box, so how can this be purposed for things other than what the manufacturers actually say can be used for? Can I use it for in some other fashion? You can cut down on how much you have to carry.
I think this is what I describe as modularity. I told you the other day, my wife, God love her, can burn herself on a cup of ice. So I carry some foil with me everywhere I go. We keep it in 3 or 4 different places in the house. And plus, if push came to shove, I could probably squirt this in somebody's eye and try and run away.
Good self-defense.
Either that or push it in there, right, too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, hold still while I put this in there, right?
If you have a family member that you know has severe allergies, you're probably going to throw in an EpiPen. You might even throw in, if it's a little less severe, you might throw in some Benadryl and cortisone, something like that. If you know you're running out of the woods a lot, might throw in some cream to treat poison ivy. So I think there are a lot of different options. You just, again, you have to figure out what the goal is, know the medical requirements of the people you're going with, and then just change things around as necessary.
Have a plan, know the goal, be the guy or gal. It sounds like we've got some. Todd, you had a parting shot.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't think, everybody really gets a real scope of how important this is, but Dr. Hammesfhar, you can correct me on the dates. My dates are probably wrong a little bit, but he really doesn't get, in this program, doesn't get enough credit, because back in 2006 or 7, when you introduced this with the military, the first year it saved like 3,000 soldiers' lives because they initiated this tourniquet. And, people go around and goes, oh yeah, first aid, but you imagine 3,000 men and women survive because of this tourniquet, and that probably the sea locks and the chest seal, but mainly this tourniquet. And you don't really think of the scope of, we're talking about, hey, if you're at the range, everybody's like, yeah, well, I don't go to the range that much, and if I do, nothing ever happens. The car accident, we had a wreck in front of the range the other day when we pulled out, and I jumped out with my bag. Well, thank God nobody was bleeding bad and it was okay. But again, most people don't see any of this, so you don't really get the full impact of how important this really is. Dr. H, you can finish up on that, because you were actually there and did it and made it and all that stuff.
Well, I wish I had the patent on that thing, on the tourniquets, but I really don't. They were actually developed by a couple of special forces guys out of an elite unit, and it came about out of necessity because they saw what was happening. And then Frank Butler and the COTC, the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care, they were the ones that really put together the whole protocol and pushed this out initially into the Rangers. The Rangers were the ones that encompassed this and made it a mantra. Everybody in the Ranger Regiment had to know it, even non-medical personnel. And they're the group that had all the saves, and then they were so successful there, it was then rolled out to the rest of the military. And it's just been going like gangbusters ever since, now to the civilian side. And it's a worldwide, I might add.
Yep. So everybody take some classes. We've got, Mariana probably put up, we got some tactical class coming up with some more advanced training class you've already been in, the precision rifle class. We've got some handgun and beginner carbine classes coming up. So those will be on our website. Just go to Firearm Safety, and we'll also have some medical stuff that ties in with every one of our training has medical. We're getting Dr. Hammesfhar to do a certification course for a lot of our people coming up on our stuff. So look at the website, get with Matt, somebody, Mariana, we can get information out to you.
Well, that's what I was going to say is, where should folks go to find out, oh, and look at that, man, Mariana is always on it. This is where folks should go if they want some training, and we'll make sure to connect this as a handout. I'll put a copy of the PDF of the scrolling presentation as a handout so everyone can download the handout tonight. Go to firearmsafety.com. Click on training. Todd is fantastic at what he does. He has taught my 10-year-old to be the best shot in the house. We're going to go out shooting with him tomorrow morning, as a matter of fact. Dr. Hammesfhar, we're a little hemmed up right now in terms of training. I know, Todd, you're still doing classes where you can practice good social distancing, so there's no worries there. Dr. Hammesfhar, I know you'll be getting back into the classroom when some of these restrictions are waived. So we want to make sure that, and there's your first responder kits, folks. They're worth every penny that you pay for them. What's your peace of mind and the safety of your family worth? I'd say go out and take a look at those. I don't get any money out of them. I pay for them myself, and they're totally worth it. These guys are fantastic. It's good to know that there are good people out there like this who are trying to train us and do the right thing, to be the right person, and to help out wherever that we can. I'd like to thank both of you, Dr. Hammesfhar, Todd Droege. As always, I'd like to thank Mariana for making sure the lights work and the sound's coming out, and everything's going well. This has been a crazy tech week, so to know that we're actually able to pull this off was great. Yeah. Speaking of crazy tech weeks, next week we are going to perform a live stream. It may come from another location. It may be on Facebook. It may be on YouTube. It may come from a cell phone. But we are going to do our dead level best to do it not as a webinar, but as a live stream. So we hope that we're going to be out on assignment next week. Even if we just go out to the range and we're shooting guns with Todd, or we're somewhere indoors shooting guns, we may do something like that. So folks, thank you for listening in. Stay on Facebook. Look at us on YouTube. I'll send out plenty of advance notice. I'm going to email everyone with what we're doing next week. Join us right after this to do the after party. Dr. Rick Hammesfhar, Todd Droege, Mariana Wagoner, thank you all so much for being with us. Join us next week, 5:56 p.m. We'll be somewhere doing something, and I hope to see you all there. Good night, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Good night, guys.
Good night.
Thanks, Matt. That was awesome.
Hey.
Hey, Dr. H.
Just us. Okay.
Where'd the rest of them go?
I guess they went to the after